She forbade us to use our own garage. There's nothing more American than a garage. I'm not talking about the ones with automatic doors and marble floors. I'm talking about the real thing, your space, where you park the car of your choice with the freedom of someone who works, pays their bills, and wants to open the car door without a permission form. But for this woman, my garage has become the stage for a war that she herself invented, and which she herself lost, out of sheer arrogance disguised as leadership. It all started with a note stuck to the garage door, thick paper, letterhead, with the logo of the HOA, the Blessed Neighborhood Association, in the corner, and those words dressed up as formality. We hereby notify you that the constant use of your garage by large vehicles is in disagreement with the circulation standards established in the Urban Visual Statute. In other words, your car is big, I don't like looking at it, and now I'm going to try to ban you from using your own garage. The car in question was my father's, a sleek, quiet, black SUV, bought after years of working in a regional bank that he helped start from scratch. The man is discreet, polite, but when it comes to his home and family, he doesn't take any crap. And to this woman's misfortune, it was just him she decided to mess with. At first, we thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. A few days later, another notice, this time with the threat of a fine. Improper use of a residential structure in disagreement with the parameters of architectural harmony. It was as if the garage, a concrete hole with a gate, had become a sacred sculpture in the neighborhood. The woman was determined to turn our private space into a work of art that nobody asked for. The HOA, dominated by her and her 4 knuckle-draggers in khakis and sweaters on their shoulders, began to apply pressure. One of them even had the audacity to come knocking on our door one Sunday morning with a clipboard. He said it was just a friendly warning, that we should stop parking the SUV there to avoid more severe consequences. More severe, as if we were environmental criminals for opening the gate and driving in. My father listened in silence. He didn't answer. He just said, "Thank you," closed the door, went to the kitchen, and made himself a coffee, as if nothing had happened. But what many people don't understand is that when he's silent, it's because he's processing. And when he sues, no one gets away with it. 2 days later, without an announcement, my father acted. He didn't shout. He didn't send an email in bold. He didn't post in the neighborhood group. He just made a phone call, just one, to the risk committee of the bank, where he is a director. He asked for a routine audit of all the associations with open credit applications. Guess who was on the list? The neighborhood HOA. The entire condominium depended on an approved line of credit to renovate the community center, expand the playground, and install a camera system that the woman herself said was urgent for everyone's well-being. The application was almost approved. All that was missing was a signature, and the bank was my father's. He didn't deny it. He simply suspended it. He froze the analysis with an internal remark: administrative inconsistency and conflict of interest with members. A silent translation of, "You messed with the wrong family, and now you're going to pay in emotional installments." That week, chaos knocked on the HOA's door. First, the property manager, the husband of one of the woman's friends, called asking for an explanation. Then, the vice president sent an email trying to understand the origin of the financial restriction. And the woman, the very muse of architectural authoritarianism, she disappeared. No meetings, no speeches, not even the usual mechanical good morning from her mouth. Meanwhile, the garage at our house continued to be used normally. The SUV went in and out without a problem. The HOA warning signs were discreetly torn down, like someone trying to hide their shame without admitting error. And my father? He was still drinking coffee, reading the paper and going to work, as if he hadn't just brought an entire neighborhood to its knees with one ring on the phone. She was gone for a whole week. She didn't show up at HOA meetings. She didn't walk in the morning in her beige sweatshirt, matching her friends. And she didn't post any of her inspirational phrases with plant backgrounds and sepia filters. Her silence was an unanswered cry for help, because when the going gets tough, not even aesthetics can save you. But while she was hiding, the other members of the association began to freak out. Without credit from the bank, the work to extend the community headquarters came to a halt. The contractor stopped work in the middle of the project, leaving scaffolding, cement, siding, and a crooked sign in the middle of the sidewalk. The new court, that was due to be delivered by the end of the month, became an abandoned lot with soft sand and 3 traffic cones lined up with zebras, and nobody understood why it was blocked. The bank wouldn't give any details. All it said was that the requesting institution had pending administrative issues and behavioral inconsistencies. It sounded like something out of a conspiracy movie, a phantom blockade with no face, no name, but which held everything back. And the neighborhood, which had always lived in decorative peace mode, began to feel the cracks in the facade. One of the oldest members of the HOA, the guy who thinks he knows everything about finance because he subscribes to Forbes magazine and owns 3 expensive watches, went to the bank to try to sort it out himself. He wanted to talk to a manager, to apply pressure, to say that this was absurd, an injustice to the whole neighborhood. Yes, he was answered, with coffee, politeness, and absolutely nothing resolved. The system was stuck. The request was frozen. The decision had already come from above, right from the top. Meanwhile, my family carried on as if it were just another month. My father never said anything, and his silence was precisely what bothered me most, because his wife knew. She knew who he was. She knew where he worked. She knew that his pen was worth more than all the HOA stamps put together. But she also knew that if she apologized, she would have to swallow everything she had built up, her pride, her pose, her facade of leadership. And she would rather hide than admit her mistake. But the neighborhood doesn't forgive those who delay new toys for children. And when the mothers realized that the extension of the playground had been suspended because of an unexplained pending issue, they began to investigate. And then the gossip became electric current. One mother discovered that her wife's husband worked for the very company that had suggested the visual harmonization of the garages. Another discovered that the reports sent to justify the new parking policy had been created by herself. All tied up in a, let's pretend it's collective, but deep down it's just ego camouflaged as urban planning scheme. With the pressure mounting, she finally showed up. She attempted an extraordinary HOA meeting to explain the latest developments. She arrived tidier than usual, with that protocol smile and a handful of papers in her hands. The room was full as it had ever been. Even those who never showed up for meetings were there, emotional popcorn in hand, ready to watch the fall. She tried to justify it. She said that the garage episode was an attempt at visual standardization, that she had no intention of disrespecting anyone, and that the blocking of funding was an unfortunate coincidence. But it was too late. People wanted blood. One of the neighbors, usually quiet, stood up and said, "Coincidence is tripping on the sidewalk. This was sabotage, and we paid for it." She had no reply. She tried to disguise it with a smile and change the subject. But no one else was listening, because the spell had broken. The fear, the artificial respect, everything had evaporated as the cement dried in the middle of the construction site. Over the next few days, more people began to speak out. Old emails from her circulated. One of them, in particular, was leaked in the general neighborhood group. It was a message in which she said that certain residents should rethink the type of car they leave out in the open because it affected the aesthetic value of the street. The printout became a shield. Every time someone tried to defend it, it came back. No one could deny it. Her morale, once shielded by smiles, was imploded by misplaced commas. She tried to hold on. She launched a dialogue and reconciliation proposal, suggesting a new vote on the parking policy. Nobody showed up. It was ignored as spam. A month earlier, anything she said became the norm. Now, not even the neighbor's dog would obey the command "stay" if it came out of her mouth. And the bank? It was still mute, but the damage had already been done. The whole neighborhood knew that the woman's fall wasn't caused by a scream or a complaint. It was just a chain reaction, cold and surgical, from a father with a job and a garage. Rumors began to spread in the neighborhood. Like everything that involves people with too much ego and not enough morals, the case grew. A local columnist, one of those who writes with sarcasm tempered by the ink of his pen, published a discreet note. The HOA that wanted to police garages and ended up barring itself from the bank. The headline didn't name names, but everyone who read it understood exactly who it was. And even worse, she knew that the whole city was now talking about her, not out of leadership, but out of shame. And for someone like her, who fed her image on the basis of dominance and appearance, this was worse than a lawsuit. The woman began to walk differently. Before, she walked through the neighborhood as if she were a model in a condominium fashion show. A millimeter smile, clothes that matched the shade of the flowers in the garden, a selective greeting. Now she seemed to walk as if each step were a test of stability. Her posture was still upright, but it had a forced stiffness. Her mascara was still impeccable, but her eyes were blank. But even when everything was already bad, she managed to make it worse. In a desperate attempt to regain control, she tried a new move, resurrecting an old HOA project, that plan to landscape the street. Something that involved removing non-standard trees, resurfacing sidewalks, changing the style of the mailboxes, as if painting the cement would erase the mess she had already painted herself. But the project needed money, funds that depended on the same financing that my father's bank had blocked. Yes, she tried to use the same bank. Again, she sent a new application with the name of the HOA's vice president in the header, pretending it was another proposal, another purpose. But the internal system has no patience for disguise. As soon as the association's name appeared, the request fell straight into the client with a moral problem filter. And as a protocol, the bank notified my father, not because he asked for it, but because he was head of risk analysis. It was at that moment that he got up from the coffee table and, for the first time in weeks, spoke about it. He turned to me with the calmest face in the world and said, "They still think that insisting makes it seem right, but there are some things that, once cracked, aren't even worth fixing." Nothing more needed to be said. HOA received no response from the bank. No feedback, no status. Absolute silence. And as if that wasn't enough, the city started demanding accountability for the association's latest expenses. A resident made a formal request for transparency. They discovered that the contract to renovate the playground had been overpriced. There was no evidence against her directly, but as president at the time the contract was signed, her name was involved in everything. The neighborhood, which had previously been ashamed to confront her, now demanded an explanation. There was an emergency assembly called by members who had never had a voice. The woman showed up. She came in wearing a dark blue dress, which looked more like an emotional restraint uniform, and sat at the front as if she still had some authority. She tried to explain the expenses, justified the attempt at new funding, said she was just trying to maintain order and the standard of the neighborhood. But no one there wanted standards. They wanted truth and reparation. An older man, a resident since the 1980s, stood up with a piece of paper in his hand and read aloud the clause in the bylaws that allows for the dismissal of HOA board members for improper conduct. It was like dropping a match in a room full of gasoline. Hands went up one by one. The vote was unanimous. She was dismissed right then and there. No fight, no fuss, just the coldness of the consequences. She tried to argue, of course, but no one gave way. No one interrupted the silence that ensued. She left the meeting looking at the floor. The sound of her heels was the only sound until the end. Over the next few days, boxes began to appear in her driveway. Then a removal truck. The for sale sign was put up one late afternoon, like someone trying to say goodbye without looking you in the eye. It wasn't official yet, but it was already clear. She was leaving. The woman who had tried to control where others could park now had nowhere to keep her own ego. The neighborhood breathed a sigh of relief. The HOA resumed its projects with new people, simple people. My father carried on as normal, as if it had all been just another Tuesday between meetings. But the lesson remained. You don't mess with people who work quietly, and even less so with the garage of someone who has the power to shut down the whole neighborhood with an email. The for sale sign remained there for weeks. Each day it became more faded by the sun, more symbolic of the abandonment it itself caused. The woman who used to make a point of policing other people's lawns now barely left the house. It was as if the house's perfect facade had melted along with its credibility. Even the birds seemed to avoid landing in the gutters. The garden became a jungle. The mailbox was full. The plants she insisted on calling bioaesthetic space gradually died, as if they no longer wanted to serve as a backdrop for meaningless speeches. The HOA continued to function. Better, in fact. Without it, meetings became quick and objective. The new president organized a cleanup effort, restored the playground with funds donated by local businesses, and renegotiated with another bank, one that, curiously, was a direct competitor of my father's bank. The rivalry became an inside joke. You can trust them, as long as they don't mess with anyone's garage. The new financing was approved, but it was smaller and leaner. Because the neighborhood learned from the fall, it was no longer about embellishing the facade. It was about preserving what really mattered: respect, common sense, and the freedom to park your own car without needing a letter full of pseudo-legal niceties. She, on the other hand, remained silent. She even tried to go around the local market posing as a victim. She told an embellished version of the story to those who didn't yet know the details, that she was misunderstood, that there was an exaggeration, that she just wanted to maintain the neighborhood standard. But people just listened out of politeness. Nobody else got involved. The whole time the look was the same: neutral, polite, empty. A neighbor said that she had tried to contact my father's bank again. She tried to renegotiate an old debt. She was answered by a new manager who apologized and denied her. The reason? Board guidance for credit restriction in cases of ethical conflict with the community. Corporate translation of, "You bought the wrong fight." At the end of that month, the truck returned, this time with more boxes, more wrapped furniture. The cupboards went out through the garage, the same one she tried to use as a tool of visual oppression. Seeing her own belongings cross that threshold was a silent humiliation. The move wasn't publicized. There was no farewell, just the dry sound of the lock turning for the last time. A few days later, the house was listed at below market value. The broker made a point of saying in the ad, "Renovated house, in a quiet street, with no history of active incidents with the local association." A polite way of saying, the problem has gone away. The neighborhood took a breather when the sold sign appeared. The new residents? A young, discreet couple with a dog that barks more than she talks. Simple, unprepossessing people with no plans for aesthetic domination. On the first day, they parked an old pickup truck in the garage, half the bumper hanging off, a sticker on the rear window saying, "I'm crazy, but I'm mine." And nobody said anything. Nobody bothered, because the neighborhood had already learned. Freedom is worth more than any pretty facade. My family carried on as usual. My father? Quiet, as if he had never moved a comma. He continued to drink coffee on the balcony, read the newspaper, and even said good morning to the letter carrier who didn't deliver anything. Someone once jokingly remarked to him, "If everyone had your patience, the world would be a different place." He just gave a little smile and replied, "It's not patience. It's knowing where to put the period." The woman who wanted to turn a garage into war territory discovered, in the bitterest of ways, that you don't fight with people who have clean morals, and access to the credit approval key. That you don't build respect with regulations, you build it with posture. And that when we try to control even what doesn't belong to us, we run the risk of leaving the stage without applause, without an audience, and without anyone missing us. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.